At times it seems like it does not matter how powerful your argument is, even if you're using layman terms and metaphors. Arguments are refuted with little to no evidence. It's almost like we don't speak the same language and have a hard time understanding each other. There have been studies in the field of behavior that successfully explains why we believe what we believe. Psychologist Leo Fenstinger wrote 2 books about his theory on cognitive dissonance. The first book being a study on the doomsday cult who thought the world would end on the 21st December 1954, and later wrote more about his theory in the theory of cognitive dissonance. Fenstinger proposed that we are more comfortable with consistencies and avoid inconsistencies. When a belief that is in discrepancy with a new piece of information, that discrepancy causes a similar form of anxiety that moves an individual's attitude and perception to eliminate unpleasant thoughts. To understand this more clearly, I'll use the example as used on many academic textbooks: tobacco smoking. As many are or had smoked, and others know people who are smoking and trying to quit. I'm going to break down each example into 2 cognitive elements. This person understands that smoking is harmful and addictive, therefore does not smoke. The 2 cognitive elements are consistent. There is cognitive consonance. If the same person ought to smoke, experiences discrepancy between beliefs and behavior. The tension caused by this discrepancy or cognitive dissonance naturally motivates the individual to change the attitude to eliminate anxiety. If we hold strong beliefs that are undermined by evidence to the contrary, we find ourselves in an uncomfortable state of cognitive dissonance. If we accept the contradiction, this causes further inconsistency between our past and present beliefs. So instead we may find ways to make the new evidence consistent with our beliefs. There are a number of ways for reducing cognitive dissonance. Distorting or misinterpreting constant evidence, adding additional cognitive elements, altering the importance, change one or more of the cognitive elements, or could see cognitive consonant information. These clearly shows what occurs without a person even knowing that dealing with cognitive dissonance will cause changes in our attitude, and we begin to believe in our own lies, develop cognitive bias and defend them. This is why scientists conduct hypotheses through blind and double-blind testing. That is, the individuals and or researchers who conduct tests are prevented to know certain information to eliminate subjective bias that can affect the outcome. Cognitive dissonance is just one aspect, and it does not fully explain other aspects such as mind control, although it does explain aspects of irrational behavior. Dr. Elliot Harrison concluded that people who do crazy things are not necessarily crazy. In context, he was not referring to genuine cases of insanity. Rather, that outcomes could appear to be done by crazy people, but we are not certain until we understand one's social circumstances. The real problem with cognitive dissonance is not the dissonance itself, but what we use to reduce dissonance. As an example I gave before about smoking, with 2 contradictory elements, let's look at the A, B, C, D, and E's of cognitive dissonance reduction. Altering involves changing one or more elements, changing element 1 to, hey, I am old or I am going to die young, so what's the big deal? Instead of altering, we can bring more elements to diminish dissonance, like it's only temporary, I'll quit after I buy a house, etc. And then we can change the importance of one of the elements. One could believe that the media exaggerates, or they know someone who smokes and has lived for many years without problems. Denial is what I had most problems with and is big among many people with their belief systems. 2 or more conflicting elements can be denied by a rational response, like if someone told you that Hitler was not a terrorist, but you believe he is, and it's easy to prove so. In this case, these sort of conflicting arguments will cause little to no dissonance. But when it's something that is opposed and hard to refute to one's organized pattern of thought and perception about oneself, your identity or self-concept as it's called, or in any case I'll refer to it as my cult identity, involves denying a big part of who you are, thus creating a strong state of anxiety. Denial is not simply no, it's misinterpreting or distorting constant evidence. Many distortions can be cognitive biases or cognitive distortions. So as I said in the previous video, people seek consistencies and avoid inconsistencies. And this isn't anything new, as this concept has been found in all the literature. But it was in 1960 that Peter Watson coined the term of people seeking their own preconceptions as confirmation bias, classed as one of the many cognitive biases. It affects the way one seeks, interprets, and recalls information. We can be biased on what to read regarding a certain topic, like as an example, let's say I prefer reading books written by Richard Dawkins than Rupert Sheldrake. Because Sheldrake's views on parapsychology does not fit my views that supernatural phenomena is hogwash. I could also interpret Sheldrake's views as delusional due to an erroneous conclusion such as him being a pro-theist in disguise, so his arguments are of less value. And I can selectively recall from memory one of Dawkins' views to reinforce my expectations and completely ignore Sheldrake's. Yet all these are biases. Cognitive dissonance theory further expanded by the introduction of cognitive biases that, like confirmation bias, are biases that causes distorted, illogical, and inaccurate views. There are too many to go through, so click on the link below for an explanation of each cognitive bias. There is also what is called cognitive distortion. David Burns explains cognitive distortion in his book Feeling Good, an excellent book about cognitive behavioral therapy. He explains that the way we feel is the way we think things through, and thinking distortedly can cause unnecessary depression and anxiety. As Burns explains, what we see is not exactly what is perceived. We view a series of neutral, positive, and negative events. We then interpret these events by our internal dialogue, a series of thoughts that continually flow through our mind. And finally, our feelings are created through our thoughts and not the actual events. All experience must be processed through your brain and given a conscious meaning before you experience any emotional response. But we can interpret events by using one of the 10 cognitive distortions, an exaggerated or irrational thought process found on a illogical premise that could lead or be the result of cognitive bias or cognitive dissonance. I'll go through all 10. Black and white thinking, yes or no, evaluating things through absolutes from only one extreme to the other. Overgeneralization is things that occurs that you concluded that it will happen to every time, like you were unlucky once, therefore you are unlucky all the time. Mental filter is you pick up on a negative detail in any situation and dwell on it exclusively, filtering out all the positive. Disqualifying the positive is mentally turning a positive event into a negative. Jumping to conclusions, as name applies, are assumptions you make without them being verified to if they really are true or false. Blowing things up in proportion or shrinking them is known as magnification and minimization. When you take your emotions as evidence for the truth is emotional reasoning. Should statements are statements that you say to motivate yourself but causes unnecessary pressure and resentfulness. Labeling means creating a negative or positive static self-image of yourself or others. And personalization is feeling guilty for something you are not entirely responsible for. The same applies to thinking of others as guilty for something they are not entirely responsible for or did not do or say. So denying involves biases and distortions. Lastly, we can exit or seek constant information by in a case of dissonance we cannot smoke, or if we are not sure we can look into the matter until we come to a rational conclusion. In any situation, especially seen on YouTube, there are many misinformed people. Just like beliefs, they all claim to be inspired, they all claim to be true, and they all claim other beliefs to be false. In all, cognitive biases and cognitive distortions are most prominently found in people's emotionally invested attachment to certain belief systems. It's when one is faced with reducing cognitive dissonance in personal arguments or public debates that bias can either become self-apparent or unnoticed, but most times without critical thinking skills, they are unnoticed.